Go right ahead.
What's going on?
Getting set up.
Okay.
Yep, getting set up. He's turning on his Bluetooth headphones.
Okay.
So, mm-mm. Andrew, this is Ezra.
Nice
Met
to
him
meet
through
you.
Twitter. So, follow him, and I've joined his spaces a few times and listened in. I
Yeah.
figured I'd invite him to join us.
Well, that'd be
Let
pretty
him
cool. So,
yeah, let him kind of give his perspective on things.
yeah.
Now, unlike us, where we're a little anti-political, he's pretty concise in politics though. So
Okay.
I think he can give his little spiel of everything, his opinion. That's what the
Yeah.
legacy right's all about.
Yeah.
Not
Because
hearing
nobody
anything
has.
out of the Bluetooth ones, but
Yeah,
these here I can at least hear you out of one. So we'll just have to go with it.
Okay.
that is
So,
all that matters, as long as we can hear each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like I said, it's nice to meet you.
So,
Just a sec.
with
All right, I think I got it fixed now.
Sounds good.
with that, are we ready?
Yeah, I believe
I
we
think
are.
we're ready. Yeah.
As ready as we ever will be. So,
Hmm.
welcome. I am Buckeye Zach. This is Andrew Joseph, and welcome to the Legacy Ride. We've never really had an intro. We never really do an intro, but you know what? Today's
Or-
a new dawn of a new era. So we like to introduce. If he wants to be our be our guest and introduce himself with his name, respectfully, I will pass the camera angle. So, are we? Everything good on your end?
No, 1 second. I'm still having some
You're good.
audio feedback.
We're still trying to get the technical difficulties.
Well, we have issues like this all the time, so don't worry about it. We're very
No,
You know
often
what?
we're not.
We can just do it this too. I mean, just with the audio instead of just trying to do the earbuds or whatever. We can just do it this way.
Okay.
whatever works. As we have these issues all the time. So
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bluetooth isn't working today, and the other earbuds are. I'm having a lot of feedback, so I guess we just do it with the audio. I'm fine with it. If you guys
Okay.
are.
So I don't really have a lot of exposure to your perspective. Um, Zach has more exposure. I'm not sure if who wants to start here, but well, I guess how would you define your political views?
So,
And that,
um, I'm a liberty maximalist and a government minimalist. I believe
okay,
in liberty for the individual above all, and I guess less kowtowing to a state or a governmental institution.
okay.
now with that
So
perspective, oh, go on,
sorry,
Andrew. I'll let you
I
finish.
just I just trying to understand. So would you say you're more like a minarchist, or would you be more extreme than a minarchist, or more
I'm
reserved?
I'm closer to a minarchist than I am to an anarchist because I just think the state is inevitable. Even in a stateless
Mm,
society, you're going to eventually have the institution of the state creep in. So I think the best thing to do is to limit government to the lowest possible level, less power over the individual, rather than just have no state, because I think ultimately you're going to have a state no matter what. So I'm closer
mm.
to a minarchist.
Okay.
So with that being the case, then the consolidation of power should never be on a larger scale of things within society. Then would that be kind of close to your perspective, where maybe it stays more within the local community, and we don't
We
have
shouldn't
like
have
the
a kleptocracy or an
mhm,
oligarchy running the government.
Hmm.
We should have a collection of individuals, but they should
mhm,
not have much power over the individuals in the wider community, in the states and in the communities. They should be basically stewards, not masters. The politicians, congressmen, the presidency, those should all be relatively powerless positions. I I come from the belief that if the government is big enough that you see it and it affects you in your everyday life, then it's too big.
I see. So let's put it this way: that influence caused by the government would be like quicksand. It would draw you in, but you think it should be in reverse. That we should be drawing the government's power in like quicksand. They should be trying to swim upstream and trying to just be able to barely breathe while we're sitting there enjoying the oxygen, like it's not a big deal.
Put it in a different context, I think that the consent, the governed need to reclaim consent. We need to let the government know basically that they are not in charge, the people are in charge. And the way that this institution was supposed to be built, the way that the founders built it, was so that the people would be more in charge than the government would be. But we've gone away from that in the years after our founding. And I think we need to get back to that. And that's just one step on the path. That's not like getting back to the founding documents is just a small step of the decentralization process. Personally,
Yeah,
I would prefer community
mhm.
centered political process, community centered power rather than state centered, rather than definitely not centrally centered. I would prefer it to be on a neighborhood, on a community, on a city basis. That to me is like the ultimate decentralization. And ultimately, the decentralization to its greatest extent is just every individual being their own master. And that's more of like an anarchist viewpoint.
So you take the individualist idea of anarchism, and then you apply it to small principles of minarchist views, and exactly what Andrew just asked, and you answered. Um, quicksand. The government needs to be the one that's threatened by sinking quickly. I
Exactly.
mean, for that yeah. So with that being said, I lost my and I'm trying to think of my question actually. Well, Andrew, you have anything else to delve on that perspective then while I try
I,
to
I,
dive in my
I
mind?
that's fine. I would like to ask you, particularly,
Uh,
you believe in, negative rights, right? You believe that the state should protect our rights. I- is that fair to say?
I believe in the concept of natural rights, but I would not say necessarily that everyone has like a natural. I see it as more as a responsibility to your fellow man rather than as a right per se. States have responsibilities to individuals within those states, and individuals have responsibilities to other individuals.
Okay.
so with that, like we all have responsibility within ourselves to respect our fellow man.
Exactly.
But with with a federalized system, do you do you sway towards the federalist view that the federal government is there to make sure that the states stay in line and not oversee against individuals, or how do you look at that, because it seems like federalism has actually increased federal power so much that it's kind of a blur anymore on
Yeah.
whether or not
100%.
they're really there to actually protect the rights of the individuals from enemies, foreign and domestic. That would be in the state governments, corporations, etc. But would back to the basics, would that would be essentially what the government is there for.
The idea of a centralized government protecting the rights of individuals is a joke. The central government is not going to protect the rights of the individual. If anything, the states need to exist to keep the central government in check. The central government does not need to be keeping the states in check. That's my view.
So more like an Articles of Confederation type deal.
Yeah, except the Articles of Confederation had some flaws, and initially the convention that ended up becoming the Constitutional Convention was drawn up to fix the Articles of Confederation, but we ended up just having a whole new document. And I would have preferred to fix the Articles of Confederation, just to be honest, because I think that is a better, I guess, like it's a better standpoint. It's a better foundation for society than the Constitution is. And without the Bill of Rights, the Constitution would not be a document that I would even want to, I don't think would even be worth saving.
So with the Constitution, though, the structure of it seems concise, and the idea around checks and balances are rather nice, but people tend to either they've never really truly read what the Constitution is all about and interpret it seems, or they just don't care and it's mainly about the Bill of Rights. The first 10, and specifically the first 2, realistically, is the main argument. So what is your opinion on the structuralized formalities of the Constitution and how it forms the government for what it's supposed to be?
Well, the fact that the Constitution provides the capacity for taxation, to me, illegitimizes the whole process. I mean, the founding fathers had just a war with Great Britain, with a central government, over excessive taxation, sort of over excessive taxation, like with the protectionist policy, the tariffs, the taxation. And you would think that they would not have provided the capacity for the new government to do that kind of thing, but they did. They opened the door wide open, and I just don't see why they would do that. I think that was a grave mistake, and I think a lot of the people at the convention, a lot of the people that would have preferred the Articles of Confederation to have stayed, the people that were at the convention would agree with me on that. I guess the capacity for taxation in the Constitution defeats the whole purpose of the Constitution.
Well, out of 55 delegates, only 39 signed. There were definitely some disagreements with the Constitution. So
strong disagreements.
And we ended up fighting. Speaking of the revolution and the protectionism of Great Britain, the no taxation with representation, essentially the excessive taxation. Essentially, we as a country ended up fighting yet another war. From 1861 to 1865, we were divided, fought another war that was, for all purposes, slavery was an issue, but it was mainly two sides in disagreement towards protectionist rights with the economy. So,
right, I would agree with that. I think that there are a lot of issues that sparked off the Civil War. It wasn't just slavery. But that's a rosy picture to paint in the history books, just like with a lot of other conflicts.
So
I think the idea that ultimately the winners write the history, and the winners have written the history, especially in regards to the Civil War.
And
so,
if
sorry,
no, go right ahead. Right ahead.
I'm just listening here. The Constitution, I believe, is like it's communalized Article of Confederation. It's centralized and accelerated, has significantly accelerated the growth of the state's power and influence because it has a monetary monopoly. It makes it too expensive for people to diverge from the common narrative and perspective of the everyday person. would you say that with particularly the crypto markets that it's an attempt, not a guarantee, to decentralize the status quo and the general trend of society towards conflict?
The Constitution is a decentralizing document for certain, unlike anything else anywhere in the world, but I just don't think that it goes far enough to accomplish that end, especially not when it gives a central government the capacity to tax the states. I don't think it. I think it basically defeats the purpose of having a constitution, a decentralizing document, when you allow a central government to tax states and individuals within states. It doesn't make sense to me. And I've studied this for a long time, and it just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
So,
And you stated that there wasn't a whole consensus for the Constitution. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, there was
So there
a lot
was
of argument.
people who were allergic to the ideas, some of the ideas in the Constitution. Is that fair?
100%.
So if that is the case, why is it illegal to divorce and create a new constitution or a new decentralized monetary system?
Well,
that's
yeah, I
it.
mean, why is it illegal to divorce? Why is it illegal to secede? Good question. That's an excellent question.
Mhm.
The founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, isn't there a provision in there that states that it's treason or whatever to try to disillusion or dissolve the states or whatever? So, I mean, it's weird because you're trying to decentralize. The motive here, the stated motive, is to decentralize with this document, and yet you're doing a lot of stuff that doesn't fit in with decentralization at all by not allowing states to secede, not allowing them to form new unions, not allowing them to basically, show their distaste with the direction of a central government by forming an alliance with another state or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of things in the Constitution that, in my own personal opinion, I don't know where you come down on this, defeat the purpose of it existing.
Well, I mean, and I think there is actually there's something somewhere in there that does actually say something about
Yeah, for sure.
about treason, but for the most part, there's a Bill of Rights though, and you would think that if the federal government, if they truly were trying to interpret it correctly, you would think that the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights would be that certain clause for succession. Because if anything, if the federal government can't deal in any legislation and the states can't deal with legislation, essentially there's a disagreement, then it has to go back to the states. So whether it's in the Constitution clause or it's the 10th Amendment that you want to, it essentially is just, it's basically, from my perspective, it's basically signifying that the federal government, from the beginning stages of this country, the powers that be just did not want to dissolve this country.
Pretty much. Pretty much. I think that from the beginning, let's face it, when they called the convention to fix the Articles of Confederation, quote unquote, there were some people that went into that convention already knowing what was going on. They had an idea. There was going to be no fixing of the Articles of Confederation. They knew there was going to be a new document. And I think that a lot of people were like tricked into, calling this convention and into participating in this convention, thinking that the Articles of Confederation reboot. But what they got was a whole new document that basically, defeated, got rid of a lot of the decentralization that the Articles of Confederation included. So I think that they got a raw deal for certain.
Well, not only that, but you had guys like Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris who were essentially, yeah, they wanted the bank, and Morris was most definitely an asset to the most notorious family in the secret history of the world, the Rothschilds, and there was definitely some nefarious dealings going on in order to get that situation put in place, and that's what essentially split the convention down the middle between the anti-federalists and the federalists, which would eventually become the two political parties that would sustain our country for a time period before they would evolve yet once more, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, Jefferson versus Hamilton. So,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
The Federalist Papers, I've read them. I think that some of the Federalists meant well. They weren't, it wasn't really a malice thing for a lot of them. But I think they made a huge mistake, a fatal mistake even, by getting rid of the Articles of Confederation altogether and just putting up this new document. It's Patrick Henry had some really good comments about the whole constitutional process. I forget exactly what his comments were. Something like, can a constitution or can a legislature not be as tyrannical as a king? And I don't
mhm,
think they took that into account. A legislature, a body of individuals that get to vote on your well-being, get to vote on your security, quote unquote, can be
mhm.
just as tyrannical to you as a single person can. So it's not like if you just make it a bigger body, if you just make a legislature where they get to vote on your life pretty much, that it's going to be less tyrannical than a king. I would argue that it's more tyrannical than a king.
It can be, and that's for a man like Lysander Spooner, who wrote about extensively about the United States Constitution and the failed contract or lack thereof, so to speak. He essentially he diverted towards demanding that the legislation be proven for what it really was. They're a elected uh, group of tyrants who have no true accountability. And he liked to use the phrase, especially in his essay "Constitution of No Authority," secret band of robbers and murderers. And he's not
Mhm.
talking about the legislators. He's not talking about the elected. He's actually talking about the elector, the voters, because through this contract of the Constitution, you have you essentially have people, and at that point, small facet of society, mainly just white men over, I think at the time they may have had an age, but typically they were probably in their 30s plus at that moment. And at least they were common law instead of elite landowners as original, but they vote for whom they perceive should lead them. The majority wins. The lose is essentially unconstitutional, as the minority is the opposition, and but nobody is actually known because you voted by secret ballot, and thus by secret ballot where you are individually unknown, then those who you elect don't necessarily know who exactly the majority individually are that voted for them. So with that being the case, they are there's no accountability to what they can or cannot do. So whom are they representing? If they're representing the majority, but they don't know the majority individually, then it's irresponsible to conclude that anybody that's elected in, especially on the federal level, anybody that's elected um, in this country under the United States Constitution's clause is actually for the rights of the individual.
I
I mean,
take
they're
it,
just going to go and
I
hmm
take it you've
so they're.
read Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, correct?
I've briefly read a little bit. I haven't got delved into it. Andrew, I think you've actually read it fully, haven't
No,
you?
I haven't read it yet. I've got a
Yeah.
copy of it. I just be
hmm
trying to catch up. So,
So.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a really good book,
hmm
and it really lays out this whole thing. A lot of misgiving, a lot of difference with Churchill. But one of
hmm
his quotes, I will have to give him this. he did say that the greatest argument against democracy is a conversation with the average voter, and he nailed right on the head, because the average voter is economically illiterate. They have no clue how anything works. And let's just face it, the average American voter is stupid. They don't know anything about the system. They don't know anything about who is supposed to control what. They don't understand basic economics. And you're going to entrust these people to vote people into a legislature that are going to vote on your rights? No, no, sir.
See, that's a good point, because people become allergic to the outcomes. They don't become, they're contagious to the narrative, but then they're allergic to the outcome. That's why you see a lot of people leaving from like California to Texas, and it can only people can only coexist with these two things so long until there's direct conflict. So let me ask you, how long do you think realistically until society starts to become allergic to the very foundations of the Constitution?
The very foundations of the Constitution, and I would
Well,
also argue
the
the
common narrative Constitution.
yeah, the whole American system, basically, the whole centralized government. Basically, since I started reading libertarian literature and listening to different anarcho-capitalists, people that come from different sides of that whole libertarian sphere. I know anarcho-capitalists don't like to be labeled libertarians, but in their social ideology, in their economic ideology, they're awfully close. But I mean, yeah, there is definitely needs to be an alliance between anarcho-capitalists and libertarians, rather than an animus that I've seen. But I think that anarchists are definitely on the right track, and I guess anarchists would say that libertarians are on the right track, but not quite there yet. But I think if you delegitimize the institution of the state, which, don't get me wrong, it is illegitimate, okay? It's illegitimate. But here's the problem. If you take this whole anarchist approach, don't vote, don't participate in the process because the process is illegitimate, you're going to find yourself in a tyranny, because your neighbor is going to vote you into one. And you have to participate in the political process. If you don't, your neighbors are going to vote you into a dictatorship.
And what if we decided to divorce from that all and go live in a mountain somewhere? They'd still probably follow us, right?
Yeah, I would. I would if you had a society or whatever. But yeah, I would.
Yeah,
I would much prefer to live in like a small communitarian, not communitarian community, like a community-based institution, rather than like a state or a legislative branch or an executive branch. This just seems like overlords. And I know that's like an anarchist point, but I mean, basically politicians and people in the legislature, people in political positions are overlords. And I don't think that's very much different from a king or a dictator, except there's more of them. You have more kings and you have more dictators. All these politicians, except for a select few that are trying to change the process, which, God bless them, good luck. They are all basically little dictators. They're all voting on your rights. They're all voting away your rights, except for a select few. They're like little kings and little dictators, and they love that position. They like being in that position of authority, and they want more power.
like a drug.
It is. It's like a drug. Once you get hooked, it's hard to stop. So, but I mean, that comes to the point. Like you were, you mentioned Patrick Henry and him referring to legislation that the legislator can be just as much of a tyrant as one king. And that leads me to like one of the best quotes, and this movie is terrible by all means, The Patriot, but the best quotes in the early part of the movie when Benjamin, Mel Gibson's character, is in the legislature while they're voting to ratify the Declaration of Independence. He stands up before them. He's a moderate. He says, would you rather have one king 3,000 miles away or 3,000 kings 1 mile away? And that quote in that movie, since I watched it when I was like 8 years old, has stayed with me because it makes so much sense. Because your next door neighbor, their next door neighbor, everybody around you can be just as dictatorial, just as tyrannical. I mean, everybody wants authority, even if it's perceived. Like everybody perceives that their
100%.
authority is legitimate. So I mean, wouldn't have been better for this country actually to gradually just position itself away from Great Britain, sort of like how Canada and Australia and New Zealand, I mean, they still technically their head of state is still the Queen, but they eventually weaned off away from the empire, and it was a little bit more peaceful means. Now, don't get me wrong, they have their own issues, but everybody has their issues. Wouldn't have been better for the United States to come about through the decentralization, the peaceful passing of the torch down the road, like Canada and Australia and New Zealand did, rather than fight the revolution that we fought. And inevitably, now we're basically in the same boat. Our federal government forces us to pay 50% in federal taxes, let alone our state taxes. I mean, in comparison to a speck that we fought for, that our ancestors fought for in that revolution, which was like 2-3% of taxation, but no representation. Of course, I mean, nobody wants to get taxed. All taxation is theft, it's extortion, but I mean, that's a small pill to swallow when you realize they were fighting for less than what we're getting taxed now. And I
Yeah.
Hmm.
mean, our
Yep.
government's
I
overexpanded.
think the
So what,
tax that they were fighting against was like a 3% tax.
something like that. Yep. So what would that have been the better route then to eventually kind of make peace with Britain, kind of start a decentralization process down the road, or would the same outcome be the same? And a revolution would have been fought, sort of like how the Civil War ended up being
I
fought.
I'm for peaceful resolution when possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the founders did take that route. They did try to
Mm-hmm.
petition the king and he laughed it off.
That
I
is
don't
true.
think the revolution was, wrong. I think they
No.
did the right thing by fighting the king. It was a
Mm-hmm.
futile effort. A lot of people saw it as that, but they actually did win because of, French influence and a lot of things going the right way.
Yeah.
It was like a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the better course of action would have been rather than starting a new centralized government, a new, I guess, group, a new confederation of states. After the Revolutionary War, after they threw off the chains of bondage from King George III, um, they should have split up into 13 separate countries. It should have been separate countries. They could have had an alliance, but there wouldn't have been one centralized government. I think that's ultimately the problem, and that's where we draw a lot of our problems from today.
Mm-hmm.
The institution of the central government. So if it were 13 countries, and then you just countries as history goes on, I think we'd be in a better position.
Well, then you do run the risk of the larger colonies or the larger states at that point that have more influence absorbing the smaller colonies. So, or either as a vassal for the most part, or you think that would be would that have been more of a major concern? Is that why they may have decided to consolidate and unify, or was there a more nefarious means to wanting centralized control, in your
I
opinion?
think that humans in general
Mm,
desire some form of safety. And for whatever reason, the average human being thinks that their safety lies in a state. And I
mm-hmm.
don't think the founders and people in the 1700s were any different. They feel like that without a central collection or a central gathering of control, someone
Mm-hmm.
to look up to, someone to protect you, that you're basically in a state of chaos and you're vulnerable. And I don't think that's necessarily true. But I think the desire for a central government comes from a point of a desire for safety. Like whenever
Mhm.
I make the argument that the central government is illegitimate and we don't need it, and a lot of the institutions of the central government are illegitimate, we don't need them. Everyone always tells me, but we do need them. We do need them. What if we're attacked? That's always the
Mhm.
pivot. What if we're attacked? What if there's a war? What if there's a world war? What would we do? So I think that's basically where it comes from. This whole belief that government equals safety, and we need to have some kind of a centralized state in the event of a war or a natural
Mhm.
disaster or what have
Everybody wants freedom, but nobody wants the responsibility for it.
you. Hundred
So,
percent.
mm.
It's
Yep.
too
Andrew.
expensive.
Liberty is
Mm.
responsibility, and that's why people don't like liberty.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. I think you had another question, Andrew.
I do, but we're gonna go ahead and cut it off here so we can have our sponsor spot, and we'll be back in just a minute. Thank you very much.
All
Okay.
right.
There's no video of President Trump sucking a ding dong. And so what if there was? I never sucked any ding dongs. But I'll tell you, if they were going to blackmail me to start World War III about one, I'd say, hey, I sucked a golf ball through a freaking garden hose.
Are we all in?
We are all in, it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Welcome back.
let me go ahead and just get this on the table because I'm kind of curious. Can I ask you to share your perspective on agorism, just as a philosophy in general or strategy?
Or as we like to
Agorism?
refer to as left libertarianism.
Agorism approaches libertarianism, anarchism with a little bit more of a left bent.
Mhm.
I wouldn't go as far as to say it's left libertarianism. I think it's close, but I don't think it's quite there.
Well,
Agorists,
we're to the
um,
left of ANCAP. That's really all the left really means.
Yeah.
you all are, yeah, definitely different from ANCAPs, but you're close. I'm not really. I mean, I'm not very well versed on like agorist ideology. I know what you stand for. I just haven't read your philosophy. Um, can you kind of give me an idea of where you differ from libertarians and anarchists on certain issues?
So I can probably say for Zach, but I can say for sure, it's just my personal perspective from what I've gathered, that agorism, that me and Buckeye Zach here believe that agorism helps co-regulate anarcho-capitalism. It's like a strategy, like I said. Uh,
Mhm.
it it forces the state to contract and not be able to expand at such an accelerated rate. Everything is about decentralization, and that's it's think about it like people say there are go zones, no go zones, and stuff like that. Like say you go up to up up to sorry, I'm trying to remember the
Take your time.
Michigan. Uh, you know how there's safe zones that you can go to and stuff like that, but or the influx of population to people from the Middle East and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So that kind of fits in with agorism, is that if you wanna access something, no matter what people may feel about it, a particular thing, there's still people who are going to act on it, because they're not allergic to it. It's contagious to them. They need it.
So
So
you believe in a 100% free and open market
yes,
Basically,
of
yes.
anything, even stuff that we would say violates the non-aggression principle.
Yes, to a certain
I,
extent, because from my perspective, you can't always stop it, because if you stop it, then you're just going to cause more
conflict.
aggression and more issues. I mean, and we're compliant with within our own, non-compliant with those that act in an aggressive manner. So it's essentially divorce. So we work within the market, we counter it, and if you want
Yeah.
to dissolve that from like say your society, then you would counter it economically. So make people. I mean, I don't know. Look, let's take marijuana with antidepressant drugs, for that matter. Um, some people that partake in anything cannabis, whether it's edible or smoking it, whatever, tend to believe that there are, and science can back this up. For some people it wouldn't work, but for others, marijuana could be a tremendous antidote towards their depression and
Yeah.
towards their mannerisms of their mental illness issues. And for those, they may need to take something like Zoloft or Abilify. So they may have to. So you embrace in the market that the consumer wants to expand into that helps them. So essentially, both sides are going to be countering one another. You have a cannabis industry, you'll have an antidepressant lab made drug that's created they just counter one another. So they're in frequent competition, and pretty much they could force one another out of business, and in reality nobody's going out of business in the real market, because there's always going to be somebody that steps up and starts their own business with that facet of industry within that segment of the market. So it's all about countering. So that's pretty much what we perceive. Like there's no compliant. There's it's just a non. It's a compliant, non-compliant, non-violent means to living life.
Well, I agree with decriminalization of drugs, and I agree with
Mm-hmm.
A free and open market for controversial things. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the issue I have. How
Mm-hmm.
controversial are we willing to go? Are we willing to say human trafficking should be allowed? Are we willing to say that, trade of body parts should be allowed? How far are you willing to take that philosophy?
Well, as long as it's voluntary, but that I mean, there's always going to be life is in the natural world that we live in. It's chaotic. So we just have to live within it. So
Yeah.
there are and people have their own moralistic construct, and so people are going to divorce from things that they're going to completely separate from what they deem immoral on their own individual conscience. So, and it's not that we can stop human trafficking anyway, because look at how much, like, using human trafficking, especially in the sex industry, um, as well as immigration, but specifically in the sex industry, the prostitution, the sex slavery, that has expanded innumerously because we have been split. Our market has been split into two for what the government can control, and the government overregulates. And so, because we have the quote unquote white market, which is government controlled, the regulated market, basically the corporate market, and then you have the black market, and the black market, in order to survive, it has to get pretty damn ugly. Um, you end up having the rampant expansion of ugly things that occur. So like you can't stop. You really cannot stop ugly. You can only separate from it, and that's essentially what an agorist or agorist, tomato tomato, however you want to call it, operates. Is we just as long as there is a peaceful, voluntary, and consensual relationship between those within a realm of the free market, which is how society runs. That's
Yeah.
that's how we perceive things. So moralistically, I'm not going to be the one that's going to be for sex trafficking. I'm not going to want to be a part of that facet of the market. I'm going to make sure that I try to counter that in my own way by embracing more positive realms of the market. But you're always going to have evil. There's evil in this world, and you can't stay away from evil. or actually you have to stay, well, you can stay away from evil. I should change that. You can't fight evil, because evil, if you fight evil, you're going to end up becoming evil yourself. So the best case scenario is to counter it in your own way and separate from it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that
So,
100%.
mhm,
Yeah, I don't consider that radical. I think
mhm,
that if somebody has something that they don't want to do, then they should just not do it.
mhm,
Yeah.
But I would say that on issues, I mean, such as murder, such as theft of property, such as theft of a person themselves, that kind of thing should 100% be illegal and 100% discouraged by society, because that basically, you're talking about a voluntary relationship here.
mhm.
Theft is involuntary, murder is involuntary, all this stuff is
Yep,
involuntary. So
yep.
if the criteria is voluntary, is it being voluntary, then
Yeah.
theft, murder, rape, those things cannot be legal in a voluntary society, because they are by definition involuntary.
Okay. So that's a good point. But I
Mhm.
would ask your question. I asked you a question in your opinion. How do you counteract something such as futures markets in the crypto, where there are markets that literally have the capacity to predict and bet on people's assassinations? If it's
Um,
decentralized, how can you how can you guarantee something like how can you counter
that's an interesting question. For sure. I don't think that you can regulate transactions between individuals, no matter what that transaction is related to. Because if you give the government the power to regulate transactions, then that's going to break the dam wide open. So you can't give them the capacity to regulate transactions, voluntary transactions between from one person to the other, whether it be
Mhm.
money, whether it be crypto, whether it be pebbles, whatever. So um, I don't think I would regulate that, because ultimately gambling, illegal gambling, betting, that kind of stuff
Mhm.
already takes place in the criminal market, and
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
cannot regulate that. I mean, you just cannot shut that down. It's impossible to shut down the black market. It's
Yeah.
Mhm.
just not possible to do.
It's
Not
Yep.
shut
Pandora's
down the black market.
box. The
And if you
more,
tried to shut
the
down the
more,
black market, you
yeah,
would fail miserably.
it's Pandora's box. The more that you try to put it back in, the
Might as well.
less capacity it is for us to, deny the reality of life. That there are going to be people who act, people who are nonconformists, who don't give a
Mhm.
damn about the consequences, and the only solution is direct and physical retaliation
Mhm.
if your rights are violated. Your your rights, your right to action ends your property line. After that,
Mhm.
everything else is private, and the consequences are gonna play out as they need to play out. This
Mhm.
is It's just a natural
Mm-hmm.
law.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
And you can't give government the capacity to regulate certain industries, certain transactions, certain types of different things government
Mhm.
shouldn't regulate. Because if you give them a capacity to regulate it, because you say that, well, being used by a criminal enterprise or whatever, you give government, give the state an inch, they will take a mile. So if you tell them, okay, you can regulate transactions of crypto on like the dark web,
Mhm.
for like criminal enterprise, they're going to say, okay, if we can regulate crypto for criminal enterprise, then we can regulate crypto. Period. They're going to
Yeah.
take that and they're going to run
Mhm.
with it. So you cannot give them that capacity.
Mhm. What's the scary aspect is they're working on that capacity right now with the good old fashioned digital dollar.
Yeah.
So,
They're trying to
and we,
sand in the engine. As I was saying in our last program, you know, they think they could just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and then the
Mhm.
market will the capacity for the market to adapt will capitulate.
State control is a drip, 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 drip process. They don't just come in all of a sudden and say, we're going to take over this or we're going to regulate this. They do it a little bit at a time. Just one regulation here, one regulation there. They don't do it all at once. It doesn't come on like a flood. It's a drip, drip, drip process. And every time that drip comes down, you lose a little bit of your liberty.
And a nice comparison to that is the expansion westward from the original 13 colonies on the eastern seaboard of the Atlantic as we move westward. One treaty with indigenous tribes ends up turning into another treaty. Treaties are repealed, treaties are violated, and and they get moved every inch. They get moved back just an inch. Next thing you know, it's a foot, then it's a yard, then it's a mile, and then all of a sudden they're living on a reservation. What's a woodland Indian living on a reservation in northern Texas or Oklahoma, somewhere where they don't even
living on a reservation in North Carolina, Koala Boundary, which I'm very familiar with.
So Max Stirner put it this way: the men of the future will fight for rights that we don't even miss. And basically what he's talking about is grandfather. So negative rights that we enjoy today will become unpopular and out of fashion for future generations. I think we can see a lot of that in, with the traditional family. There's been a significant increase over the last couple decades. A divorce, the father is getting pushed out of the picture because the government is stepping in consistently through debt to take over the role of the father. And that significantly increases social conflict, which calls for more direct intervention. This is just straight, I want to say straight up, but it's very, very slowly paced communism, like you were saying earlier, but the drips.
And not even just communism, ultimately socialism, communism, fascism, all these ideologies draw their conclusions. They get their I guess they get their inspiration from one ideology, statism, this idea that the state is superior to the individual. And how far are you willing to take that? Communists take it to say that the state should own all the land and should own all the industry. Fascists are willing to take it to say that the state should decide which businesses succeed and which businesses fail. So ultimately, and with statist ideology, this idea that the government is superior to the individual, and also not only that, that the individual cannot properly function in their day-to-day life without the guiding hand of government guiding them through life.
Have you ever seen the movie? Okay, yeah, what it's called now. Sorry, it's a Ghibli movie. It's about World War II, but there's basically saying that and there's a line in it that says you can't live outside the system. And I think that's this, it circles back to this fact that we have one monetary system who draws us in, and it forces us to capitulate. And the only way to have a really objectively free and open market and free society is if we reverse the capacity for them to force us to capitulate by making them capitulate by decentralizing the money supply. So
exactly. People should be allowed to barter whatever you want to use as currency. Here's the way I look at it. If two individuals want to make a trade, they have to decide what they're willing to use as currency. They have to decide what they're willing to trade one item for another item, or if they're willing to trade some form of currency for that item. Ultimately, currency is fake. That dollar in your wallet is just a piece of paper that's been stamped with a promise from the U.S. government that isn't worth a hill of beans. And I think people should be allowed to use currency, whatever they want to use as currency. I mean, if you want to pay, if you got some little children and they want to buy a lollipop and they want to pay in marbles between themselves, as long as that's a voluntary interaction and they both agree on that, then yeah, that's currency.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or bottle caps, or anything for that
Cigarettes.
matter. I mean, cigarettes. I mean, that's a big currency in prison. I mean, that anything can be of value because value is subjective, and all currency is a medium of exchange. So it's a transaction piece that we're pretty much reserving as a a third party particulate to uh, to be able to allow people to not have to constantly make something or have something that they have to trade, so you don't have a constant chaotic barter system. I mean, who wants to constantly have to have uh uh I don't know, 200 bushels of corn for somebody who is going to trade, that needs to constantly have uh 4 cows, and they trade 200 bushels of corn for 4 cows. Well, how about we use this dollar? I'll give you this. We'll make, okay, how much is the 5 cows? Okay, we'll say that it is $3. $3 for, I'm just using this as an example. So, and instead now the 3 cows are $3, and then the 200 bushels of corn we'll say is uh $5. So now that you have this this medium of exchange placed, now you have the corn farmer can make more to sell to multiple people than to have something prepped and ready for the cattle farmer, and the cattle farmer can start raising cattle for a large a large shipment that can go elsewhere to, for slaughter, because now you have slaughterhouses. Now you might need some rail, you might need a transportation company to come pick up that cattle to move it, and then all of a sudden other facets of the market build, and then it goes from there. And so medium exchange, value is subjective, but medium exchange stops you from uh have having to constantly have whatever it is that person values, that they want, in order to trade. You no longer have to trade constantly. So, and have to pick a particular time frame. Now you're free to build up on that and actually advance a market and then an economy.
The trouble is that government will look you in the eye and tell you that a piece of paper stamped with their seal is worth something. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not. Unless
Mm-hmm.
it's backed by gold, silver, or something that is of value, that is universally recognized, that's of value, that
Mm-hmm.
paper is worthless. And that's a concept that the average American, the average voter, cannot get their head wrapped around.
Yeah. So real quick, I just wanted to make this correction. The film I was thinking of was Grave of the Fireflies. Sorry. It's a good movie. I think people should check it out if they haven't seen it.
You will tear up. That is the truth.
It's a very powerful film.
It is a very powerful, deep film, but it's a good movie though.
What was it called again? I think I might have seen it.
Grave of the Fireflies.
I think I've seen it. I'm not sure. I might have seen it.
Yes,
But
it's
I'll
an
have to check
animated
it out.
film. So
Yeah. There are a lot of great films made about the World War II era.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
There is one is another one, and it's been a while since I've seen it, and I can hardly really remember it, but it's called The Wind Rises, and I'd like to find that and watch that again. That's also another Studio Ghibli film, so it's a Miyazaki film to be exact. So
One of
I mean,
the things I think about all the time is that whenever there's a war, whenever there's like a supreme evil like Hitler in Nazi Germany, when you make films after the war, they don't really focus. They focus on the war. They don't
mhm.
focus on how these regimes come about. They
No.
don't
Yeah.
focus on how Hitler rose to power. They don't focus on how people basically voted him in, and he had like a 90% approval rating among the German population. All they
Mhm.
say is, you know, Hitler, dictator, Nazi Germany. We fought them, we won. Let's move on. We don't talk about how these things come into existence. It's important to learn a lesson from history, like
It is.
especially Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, Mao in China. It's important to learn these lessons, but all we talk about are these regimes. We don't talk about in film and in the media, they don't talk about how they came about, how basically the population in most cases acquiesced to this power. This wasn't just somebody coming in and declaring themselves dictator.
Mhm.
They didn't put the crown on their head. The population, the voters, put the crown on their head. So they basically got themselves into this mess.
Well, yeah, and speaking of Nazi Germany, I mean, the Nazis were able to take the majority of seats in the Reichstag. Hitler, though he lost to what was his name? What Paul Hindenburg von Hindenburg. He lost to Hindenburg in the initial chancellor or president's election. They actually had multiple recounts, I believe. I think there was two recounts, and I think one of them was actually a recall election in which Hitler still lost to in which the Nazis act and Hitler himself made secret deals with Hindenburg to eventually just have Hitler appointed as chancellor of the country, and through that, uh, being that he was the head of government at this point, head of the Reichstag, with the majority of the Nazi Party, who absorbed the other two parties. One was the Social Democrats, and I forget the other, but they made their deals to and their alliances essentially absorbed these parties, ousted the Communist Party, that was their rival, consolidated the Reichstag, and then they utilized the crises, the Reichstag fire. That was the way means of getting rid of the socialists, the communists, and then consolidating Hitler's power, the Nazis' power, absorbing everything under the Nazi control, and then Chancellor Adolf Hitler assumed Führer, and they essentially got rid of the presidential office as well. So I mean, it was through democracy that led to the absorption of power, that led to the consolidation of the Nazis, and inevitably the Third Reich.
You
So
won't
I
find that in
mean,
any history book, and you won't
you
find that in any film. You won't find that in any movie because they don't want to. They don't want to talk about statism. All they want to
mm-hmm,
talk about is how these regimes are bad. And yeah, they are. They're terrible. But how do they come about? Some
mm-hmm,
guy doesn't just get to walk into a room and say, "I declare myself president." Doesn't work that way. The
mm-hmm. No, but
people have to give him, at least they have to give
mm-hmm,
him some authority to where he feels that he can make that decision,
mm-hmm.
make that call.
Even
Another way
Julius.
to, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, even Julius Caesar had to march across the Rubicon with his armies, and then oust his rivals out of Rome. They fled to Greece, and then the people pretty much said, "He's our leader, he's our
Yeah.
king," and that's how he became dictator.
Another
So,
way to look at it is this, Hitler was an allergic reaction to the consequences of World War One and the invasion of France and Germany in the inner.
hmm
People don't know this, that France invaded Germany because they were behind on their bills, and
yeah,
they occupied the territory, and that's greatly infuriated a large majority of the population, which directly came out as a cause, the outcomes of World War II.
hmm
So
the invasion of the
Yeah,
wrong one.
the treaty. I'm going to butcher this because I'm not very good with French town names, but I think it's the Treaty of Versailles, and that basically after World War One, the Treaty of Versailles pretty much screwed over the Germans, screwed over the German population. There was a period of extreme economic instability. They got behind on their debt. And basically, it was World War
hmm
One that was supposed to be the quote unquote war to end all wars that ended up
hmm
giving I guess, setting the stage for the rise of someone like Hitler, someone that would be
yeah,
viewed as a
hmm
savior and would be
yeah,
elected
hmm
popularly in Germany.
hmm And a lot of people ignore the fact because Italy, who was an ally, um, during the Great War. They came in late. They actually were on the side of the Central Powers, but decided to take affirmative action towards and split sides. They split from the Central Power side and joined the Allied powers for land in Austria-Hungary. I think it was along the Aegean Sea coast. I might be wrong on that one, but the shoreline there, they wanted to retain that. I think that was originally Venetian territory back in like the Middle Ages, and Italy never was able to. They were never able to negotiate for their piece of the pie at the end of the war because they were a small fish. So, and essentially that ended up leading towards the rise of the Fasci party and Benito Mussolini, who, in fact, I mean, as similar as fascism and socialism is, Mussolini probably be the first one to tell you we're socialists, but at the same time we're corporatists because he all he did was he got kicked out of the Socialist Party and think what about 1920, 1920, 1919, 1920. If I'm if I'm wrong, I might be, but if I'm
Close.
not, but
It's close.
so yeah, because he came to power in 22, I know that, but yeah, I mean, he created his own party that essentially is socialist without the complete absorption of property.
Yeah, relationship between corporation, a relationship between business and state. I don't
Mm-hmm.
see that any different than just a state usurping power over the individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the state joining with a business or with a corporation
Mm-hmm.
to help them and to really make it stick. So corporatism and fascism and I don't really see the difference except for in communism they take over all the
Mm-hmm.
businesses and the government runs everything. But
Yep.
in fascism, they let the businesses work for them to usurp power from the populace and to lord over the citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
What if we all just really decided to be real cool with one another and went along our ways? Would that be okay? I think we could do that.
Yeah.
That'd be
No,
a
but
perfect world.
seriously, um,
The people
the
didn't
bank
exist.
and the
Yeah.
central government co-equal actors. The central government regulates the as the bank grows and as the central government grows, they help co-regulate, you know, how businesses can interact because they make it illegal. They narrow and create regulations that are more and more rigid. And the bank helps it make it too expensive to argue and dissolve those regulations. And that's how
Bank,
we get into the situation.
corporation,
That's how we get into
businesses all
centralism.
together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
They work together like for the state. It's kind of like an enlistment of business because
yeah,
the state is limited in the amount of I guess control that they can have over the population. I mean, unless it's like communism or something. If you want to be like a diet communist system, sort of, I'm the way I'm going to put it.
yeah,
The way that you
so,
do that
Mm-hmm.
is rather than taking control of the businesses, all the corporations, you just get them on your side, and the people that won't play
yeah,
ball, the corporations that say no, you just get rid of them.
yeah,
You choose who succeeds and who doesn't succeed. That's a corporate
Mm-hmm.
system, and the ones
yeah.
that succeed are the ones that
Mm-hmm.
do your bidding.
That Dr. Woke.
Yep.
So
And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing now with how the corporatist system is waning in. I mean, back in the turn of the 20th century, you had what was the Sherman's Act, the big old antitrust bill that dismantled Standard Oil and the like to their many different little brands, and I mean, and not allowing the actual competition that could actually probably coexist and at least counter. They may not be able to truly compete with a large big business, but at least counter the big business instead of giving this monopoly the power to just co-regulate itself with smaller entities. And that's what we have today is we have too many monopolies with too many different brands that the government allows to exist. While I mean the little guy can't compete, because there's too many regulations. The government creates the regulations that eventually get absorbed, that helps the larger businesses be able to work alongside the government.
Regulate small business and let
Mhm.
corporations run amok. And if you
Mhm.
talk to the average Democratic voter, they'll tell you two things. Number
Mhm.
one, corporations are too powerful. Number
Mhm.
two, government doesn't have enough power. And you've got to understand, the bigger the government, the bigger the corporation. Okay, because a
Mhm.
corporation is essentially a contract or a compact between the state and a business.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
states agree to let a corporation prosper and to let them basically have a monopoly over a certain industry
Mhm.
or a certain commodity, and in return, that corporation does the bidding of the state. It's corporatism, plain and
It's carpetbaggery. That's essentially what it is. It's no different from the carpetbaggers going down south at the end of the war between the states. So,
Yep.
but on an even more overexpanded, large standard, overexpanded, larger than it ever once was. But it's no different. So, and the Democratic Party of today could actually be compared to the Republican Party back then, as they were the parties of the corporation. The difference is I think the Republican Party is still that party of protectionism, which is they've never lost that. The Democrat Party, on the other hand, they've evolved. They took over the progressive movement that came about and expanded upon it, and and boldened it. They broadened themselves with the influence of socialism, and now we have whatever the fuck we have now. Just too big a government.
We have no options
We
except
have
for
no.
getting ready for that total capitulation.
Yeah, everybody wants America first, but nobody understands what America first is. And then for those on the left, they just want more government because the corporation is the threat. So
Neocons, warmongers, they can all get up, they can say America first, and they think that
mhm,
America first means protectionist trade policy, means all these
mhm,
tariffs, means we're going to stick it to China. No, you're not. You're going to stick it to the taxpayer, because
yep,
ultimately the taxpayers pay the tariffs. And
yep,
they can get up there and they can talk about all this stuff, but they talk about America first. And I'm like, bro, you don't find a war that you don't like.
mhm,
America first? Seriously, you're voting to fund countries halfway around the world when we have issues here. So it's
mhm,
like, America first? Seriously? You're not America first. You just support protectionist trade policy,
mhm,
and you also support war because, frankly, in my opinion, a lot of politicians are bought and paid for by Raytheon and by a lot of these defense industries,
mhm,
these defense what do you call it, the defense
Contractors.
companies, the military
yep,
industrial complex. And I
mhm,
had a guy I was talking to the other day, he made a joke. He said that, you know, maybe politicians should like have on the back of their seat, you should you should have sponsors on the back of
Yeah.
their seat so we know who they're bought for, like NASCAR drivers.
mhm.
Yeah.
So we know who
Well,
they're bought by,
yeah.
working for.
Well, we're up here to 2 minutes, and this has been really entertaining and really informative.
Yeah, I've
And I
enjoyed
really
it.
hope you'd
Mm.
be open to coming back and visiting with us soon. So, thank you very much for coming
Same here.
and
One last question
participating.
though. Should we end the Fed
100% and replace it with nothing.
and replace it with nothing? I like that answer.
Yeah.
So it's been fun.
It's been fun, guys. I appreciate it.
So
Thank you very much.
thank you again, and we'll definitely have to do it again.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
You too.
You too.
Peace.
Well, Andrew, that was a yet another fantastic guest appearance. So
Yeah, we're really getting the hang of this, aren't we?
I think we are, especially for unstructured dumbasses like ourselves.
Yeah. Hey, man, I can cut a promo like anybody else. I just got to screw it
Hey,
up every once in a while.
it's realism. It's
Yeah.
very realistic. You got to screw up in order to be one with the people. So,
Yeah. Something like that.
so but at the same time, that was his name is Ezra Wyrick. He goes by the Twiddler, the Twiddler, the Twitter handle at Ezra for Liberty.
Yeah.
Go ahead, jump on Twitter, give him a follow, everybody. And as for us, I am the legacy of Buckeye Zach. You can hit me up on Twitter at legacy underscore Zach. That's Zach spelled ZAK. And you can also hit up Andrew, follow him at Twitter if you want to chat him up, or he also has his Bitcoin Cash wallet hooked up on his profile. I think it's where his
Yeah.
bio should be. So if you want to donate to us in Bitcoin Cash to help us deregulate the system and derail the central bank, as well as put
Bitcoin Core.
us on the map to as well as put us on the map of doing exactly what we told you we want to do, and that is deregulate the legacy of all the bullshit by
Yeah.
creating our own legacy. Hit him up at AI Conan 90 and donate with that Bitcoin Cash wallet, everybody. Yeah,
It's
Andrew will make sure that he gives if you for one Bitcoin Cash donated, he will give half of that Bitcoin Cash away to a school somewhere. I don't know. We'll pick.
yeah.
We'll choose it. We will donate. We actually really will donate. On the other hand, if you want to support us in fiats, because that is the currency of the day right now, and in order to expand this thing, we do have a support link on in our show notes anywhere you listen to our podcast, whether you go straight to the anchor page, whether you go to Apple, whether you go to Spotify, there will be a link that is for support. I think it probably is like anchor.fm slash, I don't know, whatever. I think it's Buckeye dash ZAK, Zach. And then somewhere it says support on it, but there should be a link somewhere, and you can donate to help us um, expand this thing. So maybe
Yeah.
we can get better technology, so we're not constantly zooming. But you know what?
Yeah.
Regardless, you got to start
Zoom.
somewhere. But that all the support would certainly help. So I
Yeah.
mean, but on that end, I mean, regardless, the best support to ever have is just the support of those that want to listen, hear what we got to say, hear what our guests got to say, because there's no perspective, or there's no perspective. There's no perspective on anything. It's all just within our own unique individual minds. And thus, there is no monopoly on perspective because we all have bias and we all have opinions. And we
Yeah.
can't monopolize. We can't have anybody monopolize perspective. And that's what the Legacy Ride is all about. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Follow either of us on Twitter, as I said, and just let's get it chucking, man. Let's challenge the legacy narrative. So you can
Come.
also catch us on YouTube. We are the Legacy Right. I'm done with my promo. Take it on, Kevin Nash, Andrew.
Hey, click this. No, but seriously, check us out at Hunter Bison Crack House, and there's also the Bitcoin Cash address is listed on the description there for Hunter Bison Crack House if you want to donate there. Either it's easier to copy that way. So
It is. So come on down. Yeah, come on down. Jump on Telegram. It's Hunter Biden Crack House. We're making jokes on Hunter because Hunter is just, I mean, it's just he put it on himself, man. I'm sorry. But
Hey man,
But,
he's got to put himself over, right? I mean, obviously you're gonna be making
Is
deals
he-
with China and Russia and Ukraine and everywhere else to buy his crack and prostitutes and everything else that he does. That obviously is only on 4chan.
Exactly. So, but yeah, come to 100 Modern Crack House, join our community. We are finally starting it out. I think we finally got 9 people that have joined. Those are 9 lucky souls that get to see some silly meme or something silly that we post every day. Mainly Andrew. I'm just posting a meme or reply to Andrew's meme or video. Uh, but we're here. But don't just come on. Don't come on and just join. Come on and interact. I mean, that's what we set it up. We want it to be a community. So interact, say your perspective, and don't be afraid to call us both a couple of dumbasses because
But a lot of malarkey.
yeah, a lot of malarkey. That seems like a better word. Yeah, all this darn malarkey, silly
Just
gooses.
remember, Pedo Pete was a bad dude.
That's going on a T-shirt, man. Then does that have that'd be a great T-shirt idea. Put that meme on
Yeah,
there with Joe Biden with the cornrows and the cigarette out of his mouth. Pedo Pete was a bad dude, and then just put the legacy right on the back to
yeah.
signify it from the legacy right. But yeah, that would be because it gets straight to the point. It's funny and it's witty
It's short,
and it's
to the
short
point.
and to the point. So, but with that being the case, like I said, make sure to check out The Legacy Right, both on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and or wherever else that we're on. We're pretty much everywhere in the podcast world. So I'm gonna stop rambling and end it right here. Otherwise, we could probably go for another hour with just
Just
bullshit.
remember, we may be called Legacy Right, but you have legacy rights. You can't mute those rights, no matter how unpopular they become.
Amen to that. So. Thank you again, Ezra, for coming on board. And thank you again, Andrew, for joining me once more as my color commentator and my play-by-play analytics. We are a great team. We should just
Try to
start.
be.
Yeah, we should just start doing Let's just do sportscasts now.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm just playing. Nah, we got to promote the legacy right of the individual.
Yeah. So,
Peace.
see ya.